Welcome everybody to this webinar. Thanks for joining us on this day. I know that it's beautiful outside. The sun is splitting the rocks. It's sunny. It's just a gorgeous spring day, and you have made the effort to come indoors, take the sunglasses off and be a part of this webinar today. So I really appreciate you doing that. Um, I have put a padlock on my cutlery drawer so I don't run out there, grab a fork and poke myself in the eyes with it because I'm sick of this weather. I'm so tired of the cold and the drizzle. And I'm not a new person in Newfoundland. Many people know me. I've been around here for a long time and I can put up with a lot, but this is really starting to get under my skin. So thank you for joining us. It's a proper day to be indoors. So that's probably why we've got so many people signed up for the webinar today, because it's not fit. It's not fit to be outside. I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. Bring up today's presentation. There we go. Okay. So this topic is of particular interest to many of us, and especially to me, because I'm not a researcher, but I am sort of a boots on the ground clinician, and I'm faced with this topic every day. And when this first started to come out in the literature and the research as a link between hearing health and brain health, it really wasn't a surprise to clinicians because we were seeing this, you know, on a fairly regular basis. And maybe there was, a little bit of smoke, but we didn't see the fire. But we were saying, hey, maybe there's something to this. That why is it that so many people that come see us with hearing issues seem to have some cognitive decline as well? So it was really exciting when this was first discovered and started to be reported in the literature. And now things have really gathered momentum, and we're starting to see changes at the clinical level. Things always first get discovered in the sort of research and academia, and then they start to trickle down to what's going on with real people every day in their lives. And that's kind of where we are today. So we're going to cover that topic today. I'll just give you an indication of the agenda as soon as I can get my slide to advance here. There we go. So we're going to start out with what are some of the basic characteristics of our brain and our sensory system. And these characteristics are going to help inform us as to what might be going on in the nervous system that's causing this risk or increasing this risk of dementia. Then we're going to look briefly at what is it that is different about an impaired ear versus an ear that is functioning normally. And let me say up front to my friends here who are gathered who may have hearing loss, please know that when I describe things from a medical standpoint, and we talk about hearing impairment or diminished function, don't associate with that any indication that people with hearing loss are somehow diminished or less than anyone else. None of us are perfect. All of us have health concerns, issues throughout our entire life. And while they may be part of who we are, they certainly don't define us as people, and they don't rank us according to our worth. Everybody deserves an equal place in society, whether you are blessed with normal hearing or blessed with a hearing that or with hearing that's impaired. We all have a place, and this is really just an information session so that you can be more knowledgeable about what goes on in the human body under the conditions of hearing impairment. We're dealing with very heavy topics, dementia and Alzheimer's, but this session is not to scare you or to in any way suggest that there's doom in your future. We're really just going to learn. We're going to learn about what's going on out there. And because we've learned these things, we're going to be able to make some good choices in our lives. There's dangers all around us. And I use the example of driving a car. Going out on the streets as we learn to drive, there's a lot of risk. There's dangers. But if we make good choices and we take steps to mitigate those risks, it's a very safe and enjoyable activity. And we're going to learn some things today that are going to help us make really good choices and hopefully help us lead better lives and take better care of ourselves and our loved ones and the people around us. We're going to talk a little bit about how dementia risk was initially discovered and some of the research around that. Then we're going to look at what some of the newer research that's come out of that discovery that links hearing loss to dementia risk. And then we're going to talk about what does this all mean for me as a person, as an average person out there. So first of all, let's talk about the brain and let's get to know it a little bit better. So there are some significant characteristics about the central nervous system that are going to help us kind of figure out what's going on here. And the first of all that is that the brain is inherently connected. See, our brains are arguably the most important organ of our body. They're what help us think and feel and learn and remember, and they really are what allows us to be who we are. So they're very important. And so nature has protected our brains by encasing it in bone in the skull and also wrapping it in some very tough membranes, so because it's so important. But because of that, the brain must be connected to the outside world. And that's done through our nervous system. So because we have a nervous system, we're able to receive information from the outside world, and we're able to process it and act on it, and then send signals back out to the rest of our body so we can act on the world around us. So connection is inherent to the function of the central nervous system. And if we look at the auditory system, it's definitely one, whoops, sorry, let me back up and see if I get my pointer here. There we go. So the auditory system is really one great big connection, right? So we've got sound coming in the auditory canal. It's impacting on the tympanic membrane, transferring to the ossicles or the bones of the middle ear, and then that vibration is transferred into the cochlea. That sound is then converted to electrical signals that transfer down the eighth nerve up into the brain stem where it's processed a little bit more, and then up through into the auditory cortex. So it's really a chain of connections from the outside world all the way up to our brains. And it works well when all those connections are made. Turn off this pointer. There we go. The central nervous system is also inherently connected within, so not just to the outside world, but within. Our brain is composed of approximately 86 billion neurons. These are individual cells that connect to one another. And it's the connections, the strengthening or weakening of these connections, or the initiation or the disconnection of these connections that causes us to learn, causes us to store information. That's what makes us possible, what makes thinking and acting on the world around us possible. So connection, again, is very important to the central nervous system. This diagram here, I don't expect you to read it or make sense of it, but what it's showing in a very basic way is how all the parts of the brain are connected. So every one of these squares or ovals or circles is a center of the brain where a certain function is performed. And you can see from all the lines and arrows that they're all connected together in a great big network. So it's a very complex system of connection. Another characteristic of the central nervous system is something called plasticity. So a good example of something that is plastic would be modeling clay. You can take it and you can shape it and you can mold it into different shapes. And the brain is adaptable, it's moldable, it's plastic. That's where the word plasticity comes from. And throughout our lives, it's that plasticity that allows us to learn and adapt to new conditions, to learn new skills, to create new memories. And these pictures here are of neural networks that, when they're stimulated, start to grow and connect to each other to a greater degree. Actual physical connections happening within our nervous system. Our our brain is plastic throughout our lives, not just at the beginning. It's certainly more plastic at the beginning because we need to learn everything. We start out as infants and we have to learn everything about the world and start to interact with it. But certainly, even as adults and even as older adults, our brains are still plastic. We can learn new things, we can create new memories. It's not as plastic as when we were younger, but we can still make changes to our nervous system. This is a good example of brain plasticity. So what I'm going to do is walk you through this diagram. So here we have a little mouse of our little friend, the mouse, and he's a little lab rat, let's say. And we are taking measurements of the parts of his brain that are responsible for sound. And they're this rainbow colored area here. We'll call this the auditory cortex. So this is the upper part of the brain that's responsible for processing sound. And the shaded areas represent different frequencies, so different tones or different areas responsible for different tones. And we're going to expose this little guy to roughly a 10,000 kilohertz tone. We're going to expose him to a sound. And the longer we expose him to that sound, the more the cortex adapts to the perception of that sound. And if we go over to the right-hand side here, you'll see this map of the cortex. And you can see before stimulation, this was the area that was responsible for listening to that sound. And with lots of stimulation, we see that that area expands dramatically and starts to even take over space from the neighboring sounds, signified by the pale yellow and the light blue there, and a large green area. So this is what happens in our brain when we're exposed to new circumstances, new stimuli. Parts of our brain actually start to expand and grow. The central nervous system also needs to be maintained. So a good example would be learning to play the piano. So when I was a young kid, I was, fortunate enough to have piano lessons, and I took piano lessons for I think about 7 years, and then I stopped playing piano. And now, as an adult, I don't have anywhere near the skill level I had when I was a kid. And that's not because I did anything, but it's because I didn't do anything. I didn't continue to play the piano. So you have to maintain these parts of the brain that are responsible for these tasks. Otherwise, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. And these pictures to the right show us the auditory cortex of somebody that has a hearing loss and someone that has had hearing aids. So at the top picture, we see a person, and this is what we call the temporal lobe. So this is the side of the brain, and when their auditory system is active, so when they're listening to sound, there's this very broad area of the brain that is activated. This colored area shows where neurons are firing, so brain cells are firing. And you may say, okay, well, look at that. A lot of the brain is working here. Well, actually, that's not what we want to have happen. We want to have just the hearing parts of the brain active, because those are the ones that are supposed to be working on sound. If we apply a hearing aid to this individual and then look at their brain function 6 months later, we can see that the neural function is very concentrated now, where it's supposed to be. And the intensity of that firing is much greater than it was previously. So here we have an auditory system that's being maintained because we've applied the use of hearing aids. So connection outside, connection within, plasticity, and maintenance. These are kind of the key characteristics that we need to know for the central nervous system. me get rid of that laser pointer here. There we go. So what's different about an impaired ear? And this is a very simple explanation. There's actually lots going on inside the ear when you have hearing loss, but we're going to talk about just sort of the basic fundamentals here. So this photo is what's called an electron micrograph. It's just a very detailed close-up photo of the inner ear. And what you can see arranged in little rows like teeth there are hair cells. Hair cells are the part of the body that transfers vibration into an electrical signal that the brain can understand. Hair cells are in the inner ear, and they're there by the tens of thousands. And they're all lined up in neat little rows there in a healthy cochlea. And their job is to convert vibration into that signal to the brain. And in a healthy, normal cochlea, we get nice, smooth loudness perception. So in other words, sounds go from soft to a little bit louder, to a little bit louder, to comfortable, a little bit louder, a little bit louder, and then we have a discomfort level a long ways off. And we have very precise tuning in a normal cochlea. So the ear can hear very tiny shifts in pitch. So we're able to give a very high resolution, a very high quality signal to the brain. So we get a reliable representation of sounds to the brain. In a damaged cochlea, in an impaired ear, and again, there are other types of hearing loss that don't relate to the cochlea. There's other changes that happen. I'm not going to get into those right now in the interest of brevity, but there are other changes that happen. But mostly what we're concerned about is the damaged hair cells. So you could see now that our little friends, the hair cells, look a little bit tattered. Some of them are missing. So that populations of tens of thousands of hair cells is now reduced significantly. There's a lot less of them around to do their job. And also we get a deterioration in the connection to the nerve that supplies the brain. That has a core in the center of the cochlea called the spiral ganglion, and that's deteriorating as well. So now we have a distorted loudness perception. So sounds are not audible. We can't hear them until they get up to quite a high level. And then we have a very small area that we can hear sounds comfortably, and then sounds get almost too loud. That's a common complaint. We also get a blurring of sound or a distortion of it. So we don't hear those fine differences in pitch that we did before. So now we have an absent or limited or distorted representation of sound being provided to the brain. So when did we first start to identify increased risk of dementia? Well, the real starting point, if you ask most people, would be 2011, and this paper by Frank Lin from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And in that really well done study, he looked at 125 individuals with hearing loss, greater than mild hearing loss. We looked at 500 normal hearing individuals, 50 individuals with a moderate hearing loss, and let's see, I believe 61 individuals with severe loss. And what they did is they ruled out all kinds of other factors that would cause increased risk of dementia. And they concluded that there was a significant link between hearing loss, untreated hearing loss, and dementia. And this guy was going to conferences all over the world. He was the most in-demand speaker you'd ever want to meet because everybody started to wake up to this idea. And again, us clinicians, we had been kind of seeing this, but this was the first time that the research was really bearing out what we were seeing in the clinic. And this started a flurry of new research into hearing loss and dementia. And what really sort of capped it off was a paper in 2017 that was later revised in 2020 by the journal The Lancet. Now, if you've been in medicine, or if you know people that are in medicine, if you say the word The Lancet, that stops them in their tracks. It's like saying the New York Times, or it's like saying the Wall Street Journal. This is the journal of record for the medical community. And they created a basically broad report on dementia prevention and intervention. And that report blew everybody away when it identified 12 risk factors that could be accounted for 40% of dementia risk. And out of that paper came the revelation that hearing loss was a huge risk factor. And then it recommended some changes to personal care and to policy that could really step in and really help us manage dementia and Alzheimer's. And they identified that 40% of dementia risk was due to what we call modifiable risk factors. So there are certain things in your life that you can't change. Part of them being your DNA, your family history. And there are also risk factors that we haven't yet identified. So those form 60% of your risk, but there's 40% that's clearly can be changed, that you can do something about. So this is the list of risk factors that they identified. First of all, controlling your blood pressure, hypertension. Then hearing loss, air pollution and air quality, secondhand smoke, avoiding traumatic brain injuries, also moderate consumption of alcohol to avoid smoking or to stop smoking. Education was seen as extremely important. I think there's a couple reasons for that. Part of it is that brain development is encouraged with education, of course, but then I think also with education comes smart lifestyle choices and an ability to interact with the world in a more intense and intricate manner. Obesity and diabetes is certainly a high risk factors, and also lack of physical activity. And then they identified a cluster of smaller risk factors as well that I won't go into. And they also created this really excellent graphic to help us kind of understand what they were coming up with in the paper. So you can see this sort of S-shaped pathway here. So think of this as the story of your life, starting with early life into midlife and then later life, and then passing away here at the end. And what they show is that this gray line is, again, that's 60% of dementia risk that you have no control over, or is unknown to medical science at this time. But what they do show is that 8% of your risk, your modifiable risk, falls under hearing loss. There it is there. And you can see by the size of these circles the relative importance of these various risk factors. And then what also was interesting is that hearing loss is directly linked to two other major risk factors, those being depression and social isolation. Because if you're having trouble hearing, then you're probably also having trouble connecting with others, and those are definitely connected to depression and social isolation. So also when we have hearing loss, what could be happening in the brain, or what are some of the characteristics of a brain that is connected to an impaired ear? What do we see? And we also have a great paper that came out in 2020 that did a real summary of scholarly research into this connection. And when you're reading research for clinical application, summary papers are are gold, because these people do all the work, read all those 90 research articles, and then condense it down for you into something that's easy for someone like me, a clinician, to understand and maybe include in my clinical practice. So first of all, let's see what happens in the brain when we have hearing loss. First of all, we get changes to the chemistry of the hearing part of the brain, what we call the auditory cortex. And this is changes to the neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are compounds, chemical compounds within the brain that help the nerve cells or allow the nerve cells to connect and transfer information to each other. And when they're not available in the proper amounts, or the wrong ones are present, then you have impaired function of the system. They also found a reduced amount of gray matter. So gray matter is the outer surface of the brain where the higher functions are processed. So it's really the thinking part of the brain. So they found that there was less of that when you had a hearing impairment present. There also were reduced connections between various centers of the brain, particularly the visual centers of the brain, the attention centers of the brain, and the parts of the brain that are involved in our resting state, our resting activation level. And also they found reduced speech perception because of those reduced connections to other parts of the brain. They also found that reorganizing, or this rewiring of the brain, led to complications in neural function. And particularly, it made it difficult for memory centers to activate. They found that listening effort was increased, which then depleted resources in the brain for other functions. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. They also found that other parts of the brain that weren't necessarily intensely involved in hearing were being recruited to support the auditory functions of the brain. And they found changes in brain volume. So it is true that our brain shrinks as we get older, but that the rate of change was greater, significantly greater, when there was untreated hearing loss. And it wasn't just in the parts of the brain that were used for hearing, but the whole brain was shrinking to a greater degree. I believe it was on the order of 1 cubic centimeter. So if you think about that, that's about the size of a sugar cube. So imagine sort of that much extra change in the brain per year. So let's look at what is the relationship between hearing loss and cognitive impairment or dementia. When I say cognitive impairment, that just means difficulty thinking and processing. That's what cognitive impairment means. So there are 3 hypotheses for what's going on here. And I say hypotheses because we're not at the point yet where we can say definitively, this is the cause or this is what's going on. I liken it kind of like back in the 1970s when evidence was starting to come out that smoking caused cancer. There was lots of people who figured, hey, that might be what's going on here, but it took research to kind of get to a critical mass to finally say definitively within the medical and scientific community, yes, smoking causes cancer. So we're building that mass of evidence of hearing loss being related or linked somehow to cognitive impairment through these papers that I've talked about, but we're not quite there yet. So we still have to call these hypotheses, or these are our best guesses as to what might be going on. So they would be called, first, the common cause hypothesis. Then there's what's called the degraded information hypothesis. And then thirdly, the sensory deprivation hypothesis. So these are kind of the three paths that might be leading us to the answer of what's going on. So the common cause hypothesis goes like this. We have an as yet undefined neurodegenerative or something, this is a process that is changing our uh, nervous system, a neurodegenerative pathology or illness that is affecting both the auditory system and the brain. So because it's affecting them both, they're both changing together. So one is sort of, they're hand in hand, but it's not causal. They're just happening at the same time. So there is some evidence for this. That would be that, first of all, that the brain changes purely just due to aging. And this is the whole nervous system changes purely due to aging, and perhaps the ear is just part of that change. And also we notice that there are parallel changes in our sensory systems as we age, such as deteriorations in vision or in taste. So this is not outside the realm of possibility. The next hypothesis is the degraded information hypothesis. And personally, I think this is getting a little bit closer to what's really going on. So this one would state that poor input from our hearing system places increased demand on our brain's resources. And there's lots of evidence for this. So we know that listening requires increased effort, and effort in our brains is just more areas of our brain being used more intensely. We also know that when we're having trouble with hearing, other brain tasks become more difficult. So there's lots of studies to show that if we can't hear well, then if we are asked to do a memory task at the same time, we have greater difficulty. We also know that speech perception tasks suffer when you have hearing loss. So again, the brain is having to work harder to do the simple act of hear. And we know from those anatomical studies that other parts of the brain are hijacked to support the auditory system. So parts of your brain that aren't supposed to be involved have to be involved now because you don't have the pure auditory function that you had before. Then there's this sensory deprivation hypothesis, which is very similar to the degraded information hypothesis, but this is more a question of sort of long-term changes. So the sensory deprivation hypothesis is that long-term hearing impairment permanently reorganizes the brain and steals resources from other parts of the brain. And there's lots of evidence for this as well. Studies show that there's a reorganization of the cortex. The cortex is that upper layer of the brain that does a lot of the higher processing. Studies show that there are greater use of the frontal lobes. So this is the emotion control part of our brain, which really is not involved or shouldn't be as involved to such an extent, but it gets pulled in to help out. And we see shrinkage of the gray matter in the auditory cortex which would be a long-term change, structural change. We also now feel that the sensory deprivation theory can be expanded a little bit more to also include sensory deprivation from decreased socialization. So if you're having trouble hearing, you're going to avoid situations that are taxing, such as groups. And so you don't socialize as much as before because that connection is more difficult. That decrease in communication means less stimulation, less overall experience with sound and with conversation. And because you're more isolated, there's a link to depression there as well. We have an overall reduction in the quality of life, again, over the long term, and that further causes deterioration. Also, the stigma associated with hearing loss may reduce your social interactions, resulting from embarrassment or decreased self-perception of ability. So because you don't have confidence in your ability to hear or perform in a group situation, you avoid it. So these are, these are hard things to hear, but they're reality for many people, and that might be what's contributing to these changes in the brain. I will say this though, again, these are just theories. We haven't reached that critical mass of research to say unequivocally that hearing loss, let's say, causes early dementia or Alzheimer's. In fact, the World Health Organization released a statement to say that, to that effect, that we're just not there yet. However, that doesn't stop people from jumping the gun and trying to use uh, or trying to state that a direct link exists, and to try and motivate you to, let's say, take action by coming to their product or to their service or um, to their business. Watch out for this in advertising, because it's while it's true that increased risk has definitely been shown, we don't have a direct relationship yet, and we don't know why. But people are jumping the gun, and it can be a little bit of a scare tactic that people use. Um, it's certainly true in marketing that that a stick is just as good as a carrot if you want to motivate people, and so sometimes this gets used. Um, so don't let them scare you. And the World Health Organization would bear that out and say that we're just not there yet. But we are starting to realize that there's more to hearing loss than just ears. So we're realizing that age-related hearing loss, that's why I've got it abbreviated ARHL, age-related hearing loss is no longer seen as just normal. Years ago when I first started, physicians would tell people, your hearing's normal for your age. Well, while it is true that hearing impairment is certainly more prevalent as you get older, there are also lots of other things that are prevalent when we get older that we treat, and treat quite aggressively, because they're important. And hearing loss is one of those things. So now, because of the added concern of dementia risk, people are starting to wake up to this idea that age-related hearing loss is just not something to be lived with. Also, physicians are, again, because of this increased importance, starting to refer more patients for hearing tests. I've seen an uptake in it for sure. Hearing care professionals, that's what HCP stands for, we're starting to be educated more about changes in the brain, dementia, and Alzheimer's, because we're going to be faced with it more in clinic. And we're being asked to look for it more, because we might be the first point of contact for someone who is potentially going to develop some significant dementia. And I think the public in general is starting to take hearing care more seriously. We all want good brain health throughout our entire lives. We all want to age well. We want to be active and engaged and empowered throughout our lives. And so we're taking this very seriously. And also, just the demographics are changing things. So the fact that there are more individuals in their senior years in the population than ever before means that the health concerns that affect them get lots of attention, because there's lots of them out there. The baby boomers, God bless them, have changed every part of society that they've passed through as they've gone from infancy through their childhood, through their teenage years, through their family years, to their midlife, to their senior years, and the world responds because there's so many of them. So this is really starting to change for the better, I believe. So we're kind of coming into the home stretch here. I want to leave some time for questions as well. So what should I do? Well, that Lancet article really lays out a nice roadmap for us, and then we'll add in a little bit as well. So first of all, let's reduce those risks where possible. We know that 60% of our dementia risk is nothing we can do anything about, or it's certainly not anything we know anything about. It's not been discovered yet, so we really can't take any action on it. But there's 40% that we can act on. And let's say you have one of those risk factors that can't be modified. Well, if you can change those other risk factors, you've just tipped the odds in your favor, right? You know, maybe if you go out driving a car, you're going to get in an accident. But if you've got a car equipped with good brakes and an airbag and you got your seatbelt on, you'll probably be okay, you know? So if we can reduce our risks, we've improved our chances at aging well. And going along with that is stay social, stay connected. You could see there in that article that 8% of dementia risk is related to isolation and depression. So, hey, let's enjoy life. Let's get out with our friends um, and stay connected. And you don't have to be the belle of the ball. I'm an introvert, but, get together with some people and hang out with them and find your tribe, find your people that have that common interest and spend time with them. Get your hearing tested. Now, I'm sure many of the people attached to today's attending today's webinar have had their hearing tested and have had many tests. But if you haven't had your hearing tested, it only takes a few minutes. It's completely painless, and you need to do it because hearing loss creeps up on you and you will never see it coming. And there's so many people come to my office um, week after week that are convinced their hearing is perfect. They're just there to satisfy their family members. And when we do their test, they can't believe it. They can't believe what we find. So get your hearing tested. And then, if your hearing is good, get it retested later because, again, it'll sneak up on you. Especially if you're over 50 years of age, you should definitely get your hearing tested and then retested later. If you have a hearing loss, if your hearing care professional is suggesting hearing aids to you, try hearing aids. It's easy to do. Again, it's painless and it often works pretty quickly. Unlike these other lifestyle changes that require long-term commitments to exercise, to dietary change, you should do them. Don't get me wrong, but they're hard work. You know, losing weight is hard work. Eating right is hard work. Hearing aids, not so much. You put them on, you put the battery in or charge your battery up, you listen for a little bit, and then pretty soon you forget they're even there. And then they're just part of your day. And the benefits are pretty clear. There's lots of research to show that when matched for age and other issues, that hearing aids really do help. And they help you stay connected. So they help with the other risk factors as well. Should wear your hearing aids all day. If they're not comfortable, if they don't sound right, go see your hearing care professional so that they are comfortable, they are sound right, and you can wear them all day. You never know what you're going to run into in the run of a day. And if you develop that habit of wearing them all day, it really pays off in the long run because you become a really proficient listener and you're giving your brain that connection, that sound, that stimulation that it's needs, that it's built for. Nature has blessed us with two ears and an ability to hear sound and experience the world in an auditory way. Let's help out. Let's make that as easy for our brain as possible. And lastly, if you have hearing aids, please get them checked regularly. Please, please, please get them checked every year. A lot can happen to that little electronic device And you may not realize it, but it may not be working as well as you thought it was. And sometimes hearing aids just don't quit or die. Sometimes they slowly deteriorate over time. And again, it sneaks up on you. I'm really surprised sometimes when people come into my office for their yearly checkup and I tell them, you know what? Your microphone's not working, or your hearing aid is very weak. And they're like, yeah, you know what? I didn't think I was hearing all that well. And then we make an adjustment or a repair, and they go, oh, wow, that's way, way better. So thank goodness they came in to see me. So yeah, get your hearing aids checked yearly. It's not just a buy it and then we'll see you again when you're ready for your next one. It's definitely get them checked every year. And go see your hearing care professional if you're having trouble. That's what we're there for. You're not bothering us. You're not getting in the way. That's our job. That's what we want to do. And I love doing it. I love solving problems for people if they come to me with issues. So please call us or knock on the door and we'll do our best. So that's my talk. We'll take some questions here now. If you have any questions after today, my email address is there at the bottom of the screen. Drop me an email. That's the best way to do it. And then I'll get back to you as soon as I can with an answer, or at least where I'll point you towards an answer. And Ashley, did you want to go over any questions that might be there?
Yeah, so if anybody has questions, please click on the Q&A tab. Should be at the bottom of your screen there, and type your question in, and I will pass it along to Quenton to answer. I found that very informative. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You know, it's fun. It's a funny time in our history because it used to be when you saw somebody on the screen, they were somebody like Gordon St. Clair or Knowlton Nash. You know, these accomplished broadcasters and so on. And now any guy with a camera and a microphone can put themselves on a screen, and you get me.
Well, you know what? You look like a sportscaster right now with the headset.
Yeah, yeah. I try to look official.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we do have Harry Martin said, no question, but it was a great presentation and thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Yeah. Again, thanks for tearing yourself away from this gorgeous weather and joining us for the webinar.
Yeah, it was very hard to stop looking at the window at the doom and gloom.
Yeah, it's a bit rough. Nobody moves to Newfoundland for the weather.
Nope.
It's just
for
for the lovely people and the good times.
And the beautiful scenery when
And the beautiful
it's not
scenery.
foggy.
Yep, exactly.
All right. So someone said, Allison Robbins said, not a question, but I like how you emphasized that this link between hearing and cognitive decline is still in the research phase, and for people to be aware of misleading advertising while also ensuring that we take care of our hearing health.
Yeah, the misleading advertising. Look, I understand why people are eager to motivate people to come in and get the hearing care they need and so on. I get it, but we got to be careful. We got to deal with the public in an evidence-based manner and really present to them, what's backed up by science. And you know, words are important. We choose the right ones for a reason. So we can say increased risk, we can say evidence of links and things like that, but we can't say causes. You just get down the wrong path.
So we also have someone who said, great information and presentation. I would also like to point out that wearing a headset is considered to be better for hearing clarity in Zoom calls. For sure. And we do have a question, what might cause a sudden hearing loss?
Ooh, that's a big one. And that's a little too broad for me to answer in the context of this webinar, but I will say this. If you experience a sudden hearing loss, go to your emergency room, because there are certain types of sudden hearing loss should not be taken lightly, and you may find that it is. And you may yourself, you may say, oh, that's probably nothing. I'll give it another 24 hours and it'll go away. I would say don't do that. Go to your emergency room. If it's nothing, they'll know that right away. And if it's significant and important that you be there and you receive treatment, they'll need to know that right away as well. So there's lots of causes, and we could get into that on another time, maybe even another broadcast or another webinar. But certainly take it seriously and go to your emergency room.
Quentin, we also have a question. What is the earliest age that children can be tested?
Oh, would you believe that hearing can be tested right from birth? Yes, it's true. Now, I can't do it because I have a clinic that's not geared up for pediatrics. But my good friends and colleagues at the Janeway and other hospitals across the province have the equipment to test hearing at birth. So you're never too young.
That's great. We also have a question. I have Meniere's and I find that it has affected my speech. Do you lose speech?
Well, again, I'll say that let's say it's affected your speech in the clarity of your speech or the ability to sort of monitor your own speech. Without knowing too many details, I would say that good audition, good hearing supports speech production, because then you can hear others well, you can monitor your own production to tell if you're making accurate articulations and so on. So that'll be my general answer without knowing too much about it.
Right. And we have another question. In contrast to proof of causation between hearing loss and cognitive decline, is there research that shows that treatments for hearing loss reduce the risk of cognitive decline?
What I would say is that there is clearly statistical evidence that in populations, that if people have hearing loss and have had it treated, their cognitive decline is the same as their normal hearing peers. So they seem to have exactly the same or similar risk of dementia as normal hearing individuals, provided they've been fit with hearing aids for the duration of their hearing loss. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? So we do have another question. How
Yep.
do the hair cells get damaged? What are some causes?
Well, sometimes they just deteriorate just because of wear and tear. It's a noisy world, and we're in it, and especially sort of post-industrial revolution. So there's lots of noise around us, and our ears were never designed to be exposed to much loud noise. If you go out into nature, it's pretty quiet out there. But our modern world, is very noisy. So some of it's wear and tear. Some of it is hereditary. So is it in your genetics that you would lose some hair cells, have some cochlear deterioration over time? Some of it is chemical or toxins that can stress the hair cells. Also, there's evidence with, like, say, diabetes or vascular disease, that the hair cells don't get the nutrients or the support they need from the physiology of the body, and so that causes deterioration. So there's a number of different causes for and all, things like chemotherapy. Certain chemotherapies can cause damage and so on. So there's lots of different reasons. They're pretty sensitive little fellas. They demand a lot of oxygen. They demand a lot of nutrients. They have a lot of supporting structures and cells, and so they're kind of the divas of the human body. They don't take stress well. They don't like being treated poorly, and so they start to stop functioning or die off. Yeah.
Personally, I have hearing loss caused by chemotherapy. So
Oh, well, there you go. You're a case in point, right?
Yeah.
And that's a case of, certainly you have to prioritize your care and your health, of course. And I'm sure that was monitored while they were doing the chemotherapy. And certain things are unavoidable. Um, but hopefully in the future we can have some protective agents to kind of, if you're going to have chemotherapy, well, maybe we could protect metabolically the hair cells so that they don't get quite as much damage from the chemo.
Leading off of that, we have a question about regrowing hair cells. They have read some research about it.
Right.
And is there any recent news about success with it?
I wish I could say there was. Oh, my whole career I've been waiting for a discovery that says, yes, we can do this. But we've got some real barriers to hair cell regeneration being clinically effective. And just in the broad scope of things, one, the cochlea is encased in bone. It's not actually an organ that's accessible easily. So anytime we try to do anything to it, we run the risk of destroying it or corrupting it. Two, the hair cells need to be reconnected to the auditory nerve. So even if you can grow them, you have to reconnect them to the nerve, and you have to reconnect them in an organized way. They just can't be all higgly piggly. You might remember from the slide in the presentation that they're arranged in very neat rows. That organization is there for a reason. So if you just hook up a whole bunch of new hair cells to the nerve, it's not going to sound good. It's going to be all mixed up and jumbled, and we need good quality. So yeah, I wouldn't hold out for outer hair cell or inner hair cell regeneration. It's just, yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. Maybe not even my great grandkids' lifetimes. It's a long ways off, unfortunately.
Great. And we're getting close to time now. So we'll end off with this question. Is there anything people can do to prevent hearing loss?
Oh yeah, there's lots of good things. I mean, you should, lifestyle. So just a healthy lifestyle. Um, Avoiding hazardous noise. That's the biggest one in Newfoundland and Labrador, especially where we have a lot of blue collar jobs here. We're the workforce of North America, and noise induced hearing loss is epidemic in this province. In fact, it's the number one cost to workers' compensation in Newfoundland. Is so that's like, if there's anything I can tell you, is protect your ears from loud noise. You know, reduce the risk by avoiding exposure, reducing exposure, and reducing the duration of time you spend exposed.
So thank you so much for doing this webinar, Quentin.
Sure.
And